Hello, and welcome to LoreDive, where we look into and analyze the backstories of all of our favorite video games. Today we are going back into Dead by Daylight and talking about its latest chapter, Chains of Hate, with its new map, the Grave of Glendell and the Dead Dog Saloon, new survivor, Zarina Kassir, and new killer, the Deathslinger. The Grave of Glendell, Dead Dog Saloon. An early settlement on the unforgiving frontier, the outpost of Glendell was snuffed out in a ruthless, bloody gang war. Responding to the abduction of 5 brothers-in-arms, the Hellshire Gang stormed the outpost with 6 shooters and dynamite. What began as a standoff with the Mason Kelly Gang quickly broke down into a chaotic war zone. Guns fired indiscriminately in a desperate bid for self-preservation and dominance, cutting through gang members and civilians alike. When the dust settled, the dead outnumbered the living. The hostages were discovered to have been long killed, their bodies disemboweled and strewn across the town. In a silent rage, the few surviving Hellshire members rounded up their injured enemies and finished them in the same gruesome manner. By nightfall, only the crows remained, feasting upon victory left behind by the Hellshire Gang. Zarina Kassir, the plucky documentarian. Growing up in a Lebanese household in Brooklyn, Zarina struggled with 2 unique cultural identities. She felt that this cultural difference painted a target on her back. To avoid ridicule and bullies, she observed what popular kids liked and learned to project the image they preferred. At school, she would go by the name Karina and trashed her foreign lunches. At home, the news channel was always on. Urgent reports of injustice captivated Zarina, inspiring her to produce her own stories. When she was a teenager, she embraced her real name and roots, borrowing her father's digital camera to interview members of her community in Bay Ridge. By posting her content online, she slowly built up a loyal following. Each week, she picked a new issue and challenged people to speak their minds on camera. When she heard a rumor that a fast food restaurant owner was exploiting workers, she decided to go undercover and produce a hard-hitting film. She modified her look, faked an accent, and secured a waitress position at the restaurant. After 3 weeks of unpaid work, she was fired for demanding her paycheck. To retaliate, she posted clips of the restaurant owner's abusive behavior, and within hours, the news had picked up her story. But instead of supporting the events that happened, they somehow spun it to create sympathy for the restaurant. Embittered by the experience, Zarina committed to become a full independent producer and filmmaker. Her first feature film was for a competition at school, inspired by an English class poem about Sacco and Vanzetti, 2 Italian migrants controversially executed for murder. Her film won first prize and launched her as an uncompromising documentary filmmaker. Months later, her world turned upside down. A public video surveillance camera filmed her father carrying 2 coffees at a street corner a few blocks from home. A tall, hooded man stood behind him. The man shouted something at her father, who took a step back, startled. Suddenly and unexpectedly, the man pushed him into the street as a car sped by. His death caused a shockwave of anger and pain that left Zarina in pieces. The perpetrator, Clark Stevenson, was soon arrested and incarcerated for manslaughter. Zarina became obsessed with Clark, his gang, IR-28, his short prison sentence, his apparent lack of remorse. A year went by and she uncovered enough about Clark to shed more light on his crime. With the last of her inheritance, she bought a new camera and a plane ticket to Nebraska, bribing the warden at Hellshire Penitentiary to let her in for an interview. She filmed their first meeting and asked him about her father, his gang, and his violent tendencies. Clark refused to talk, but in the weeks that followed, she used her research to push his buttons and finally got a confession of a premeditated crime. Zarina's film became a tribute to her father and the trail of blood left by gang violence. When the news finally picked up the story, it was because the film had gained international acclaim. Some inmates contacted her when they heard about her documentary. Most of them shared eccentric anecdotes in hopes of being filmed, but one story stood out from the rest. An entire wing in Hellshire Penitentiary was sealed off because of the Mad Mick Massacre. The official story was that an Irish outlaw had heartlessly slaughtered the warden and his guards. From working on her Sacco and Vanzetti film, Zarina knew that the official story was not always the true story. She investigated Hellshire's records and found an Irish-born inmate sentenced to 15 years for assault in 1860. According to the penitentiary's blueprint, the sealed-off wing was part of Hellshire's original infrastructure. If she reached that sealed-off section, she might be able to shed some light on the Mad Mick story. The next morning, she joined the Hellshire Penitentiary walking tour. She blended into the crowd of jet-lagged tourists and veered off when they headed towards the kitchens. She had memorized the blueprint and knew exactly where to go and how to avoid the surveillance cameras. An unexpected security detail nearly cut her investigation short, but she was able to hide under an old, dusty prison bed. When the guards disappeared, she continued to search and finally found Mick's cell. Entering the dark, dilapidated cell, Zarina ran her hand across the old brick wall. Her fingers felt a marking and traced the letters, Death to Bayshore. A loose brick fell, revealing a gap. She inserted her hand. Fingers landed on a piece of cold, cracked metal. She fished it out, an old, rusty wrench. A damp chill ran down her spine as she looked down. A man lay at her feet, bleeding, his limbs contorted and his eyes dark and terrified. Her father's eyes. A pool of crimson blood pooled on the black pavement. Paralyzed and in shock, Zarina shut her eyes to push these nightmarish visions out of her head as a thick, black fog filled the cell. Zarina may not realize it yet, but she may have come across the greatest story that she'll ever know. But to fully capitalize on this possibility, she's first going to have to find out how she's going to escape alive. Zarina's first perk is off the record. Zarina has learned that a quiet approach is sometimes the best. Once she is unhooked or escapes from the hook on her own, off the record activates for a short duration. While off the record is active, Zarina's aura will not be shown to the killer, and grunts of pain caused by injuries are reduced by 100%. Zarina's second perk is Red Herring. Zarina has noticed that people tend to only pay attention to whatever makes the loudest noise. After repairing a generator for at least 3 seconds, it will become highlighted with a yellow aura. This generator will stay highlighted until it's fully repaired, or she repairs a new generator. If Zarina enters any locker, a loud noise indicator will appear for the killer at the highlighted generator's location. Zarina's third perk is For the People. Zarina will risk life and injury for others. For the People is only active while at full health. Pressing the active button while healing another survivor without a medkit will instantly heal them from dying to injured or from injured to healthy. As a side effect though, Zarina will be put into the broken status for a short duration. Zarina has already seen firsthand the trickery that the entity can utilize to get others to fall into despair. Now she struggles with the others, her very life the prize for her success, as she hopes to survive what may be the biggest scoop of her life. Caleb Quinn, the Deathslinger. Born in the dust-ridden Badlands of the American Midwest, Caleb was the son of struggling Irish immigrants. On the edge of the frontier, sickness, famine, and death were common sights, and pioneers fought over whatever scraps they could claim, while tycoons feasted. Caleb's father, once an engineer, had few options to ply his trade as businesses posted a common sign: "No Irish need apply." His antiquated tools lay untouched for years, until Caleb uncovered them. Noticing his son's interest in the trade, he gifted him his old wrench. The devices Caleb made under his father's guidance had quaint applications, but when his father was away, they took a grim turn. He hid plans for a mask that would gouge barbed needles into human eyes and rip them from their sockets. He worked on these while creating sketches of it fitted on boys who bullied him. With age, Caleb's engineering abilities became marketable, and employers put their discrimination aside. Henry Bayshore, the owner of the United West Rail, hired him. Caleb first invented a gun that shot railroad spikes into the ground. Next, he made a steam-powered tunneling drill. But as Bayshore feigned indifference, the devices began turning up at other companies, the patents stolen from Caleb and sold. A familiar sensation coursed through Caleb's blood, feeding the sharp pain in his heart. Rage overwhelmed him. He burst into Bayshore's office and smashed his face into bloody stew. As he was pulled away, he pushed his specialized gun into his boss's gut and squeezed the trigger. The railroad spike plowed through skin and viscera, nailing Bayshore to his desk. The only thing that saved Caleb from hanging was Bayshore's unlikely survival. For 15 years, Caleb was confined to Hellshire Penitentiary, the nation's first private prison. In a fortress of illiterate convicts, he found an unlikely friend in the educated prison warden. He designed torture devices for him, and in return received extra meals. After a time, the warden offered to commute his sentence. He spoke of something greater than monetary wealth, political capital, and his connections could have Bayshore framed and rotting behind bars for life. He had only one request: make him rich, fill the prison, use ingenuity to bring outlaws in alive. Caleb returned to his workshop, and with a few modifications emerged with something new, a spear gun. The first trial occurred when a thief robbed a Chinese laundry. Seizing on the opportunity, Caleb unleashed his prototype. Metal joints screeched as the spike shot forward, gouging the target's abdomen. But as the spear tugged, it caught the thief's intestines, and with an ungodly sound, yanked them onto the dusty road. After several iterations, the disembowelments dwindled, but Caleb had already earned his new nickname, the Deathslinger. Looking to protect his asset, the prison warden pulled strings and released Irish inmates to form Caleb's posse. The Hellshire Gang was formed. For 6 years, they roamed the country, collecting wanted outlaws for the prison, fulfilling their end of the bargain. After a bloody battle at Glendell, Caleb caught notice of a newspaper headline: Henry Bayshore purchases Hellshire Penitentiary. In the picture, a disfigured Bayshore proudly shook the warden's hand. Caleb's heart pounded with rage. He'd been sold out, a pawn in a rich man's game. The Hellshire Gang pledged their loyalty to Caleb and called for the warden's head. In a thundering gallop, they smashed through the prison entrance, shrieking like bloodthirsty marauders. A guard raised his pistol, but hesitated. A spear punctured his chest. Caleb grabbed the man's head and slammed it against a prison cell until it spilt through the bars. Reaching the warden's office, Caleb kicked the door and was met with a fortunate sight. It wasn't only the prison warden who cowered in the corner, but Henry Bayshore. Overpowered with rage, Caleb rushed at Bayshore, beating, bludgeoning, tearing at his flesh. The man's blood dripped from his face, crimson pooling at his feet. The Hellshire Gang swarmed the warden, snapping bones with each kick. With the two men broken and begging for death, the posse dragged them to the commons, where they were left to the growing crowd of prisoners. Soaked in blood and sweat, Caleb hobbled to his old cell, hardly paying notice to Bayshore's screams. He sat on the bed's edge as drops of blood ran from his fingertips. A thick, unnatural fog streamed through the barred windows. He pulled out his old wrench, cracked and rusted, and ran a thumb across the metal, regarding it with faded eyes. He couldn't remember when it came into his possession. He didn't really care to remember. At his feet, he saw a dusty path, and at its end, silhouettes of all who had done him wrong. The boys who bullied him, the executives who took advantage of him, and again, Henry Bayshore. Emerging from a fog were the tools to dispose of them. Unforgiving steel hooks, brilliant and beautiful in their simplicity. Pain tore through his leg as he stood, but he endured, pushing onwards, walking the dusty path, leaving a trail of blood flowing behind him. The Deathslinger's unique power is the Redeemer. The Deathslinger's ingenuity affords him the ability to reel in bounties with a unique invention, a heavily modified hybrid rifle that replaces conventional ammunition with a razor-sharp spear attached to a chain. With it, the Deathslinger can shoot a spear that can harpoon a survivor, allowing them to be reeled towards the Deathslinger against their will. Survivors may struggle against the chain, or use environment to pressure the chain to break. Doing so will briefly stun the Deathslinger, as well as put the survivor into the injured stat and apply the deep wound status effect. Using a basic attack while the survivor is speared, but not actually hitting the survivor, will prevent the penalty from occurring to either the survivor or the Deathslinger. Successfully hitting a survivor with a basic attack while they are speared and healthy will also apply the deep wound status effect, but will not stun the Deathslinger. After the Deathslinger has shot his rifle, whether or not he has hit a survivor, he must reload the gun before he can shoot the rifle again. The Deathslinger's first perk is Gearhead. The Deathslinger has an ear for well-oiled gears. After hitting a survivor 2 times with a basic attack, Gearhead activates for a short duration. Each time a survivor completes a good or great skill check while repairing, the generator will be revealed by a yellow aura as long as it is being repaired. Deathslinger's second perk is Dead Man's Switch. With this perk, Caleb becomes obsessed with one survivor. After hooking the obsession, Dead Man's Switch activates for a short duration. While activated, any survivor that stops repairing a generator before it is fully repaired causes the entity to block the generator until Dead Man's Switch's effect ends. All blocked generators are also highlighted in a white aura. The Deathslinger's final perk is Hex, Retribution. Retribution is a hex that lashes out upon its destruction, showing that those who cross the Deathslinger will be punished. Any survivor who cleanses a dull totem will suffer from the Oblivious status effect for up to 45 seconds. If a Hex totem is cleansed, including the one for Hex Retribution, the auras of all survivors are revealed for 10 seconds. The entity has fooled Caleb into seeing enemies where there are none, almost acting as a new warden for the Deathslinger as he hunts down a new brand of bounties. With that in mind, only time will tell whether or not Caleb will realize that he's been played for the patsy yet again. With that, we're done with this episode of LoreDive. I hope you all enjoyed it out there. I'm not sure which video I'm going to be working on next, but I'll hopefully have it up as soon as possible. As always, let me know if there are any LoreDive episodes that you would like to see out there. And if you like this video, please like down below, as it really helps me out. Currently, like a lot of people out there, I'm in quarantine, so I hope y'all out there are keeping yourselves safe. As always, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.